Okay, so this is a talk about the duty of care. It's the most fundamental principle of law. It'll overturn any act of Parliament in any country of the world. It is the law, and the governments of the world are paid through taxation to enact the law. Unfortunately, they're not doing that. They're making unlawful acts of Parliament, and hence we're in such a mess we're in. To start at first principles, piranha fish live in groups. For them to live in a group, there has to be a law, and the law is that the members of the group do not, as a general rule, injure each other. With piranha fish, sometimes they do injure each other. When they have a feeding frenzy, if one of them gets injured, the rest of them will eat that one. But they don't carry on eating each other. If they did, the group would get smaller and smaller and smaller until there's only one left, and that's not a group. So that law, that members of a group do not, as a general rule, eat or injure each other, must apply to any group of creatures, anywhere in the universe, at any time in any universe, or there cannot be a group of creatures there. Therefore, if there's a divinity which created the universe, it must be divine law, whatever kind of divinity or divinities it might be, whether it's black or white, male or female, whether it's 1 or 1,000, and if there's no divinity, the law exists anyway as a natural law, even to the extent that if there was a divinity, and I'm not saying for the sake of this argument that there is or there isn't, it's a separate issue, but if there is a divinity, and say this divinity wanted to create a new universe, and the divinity wanted to have a group of creatures in the universe, the divinity would have to obey that law, or there could not be a group of creatures in that universe. So therefore, any reasonable person on this planet of any faith, including an atheist, because there doesn't have to be a divinity for that law to exist, any reasonable person has to agree and say that is true, or look rather foolish, that for a group to exist, the members of that group do not, as a general rule, eat or injure each other. In British law, there's a law it's called the duty of care, and the duty of care is imposed upon every person in the country, including the government and the bankers and the industrialists and everybody else. And the duty of care states, you must take reasonable care to avoid acts or omissions you can reasonably foresee will be likely to injure your neighbour. It's the same thing. Your neighbour is defined in law as anyone so closely or directly affected by the act or omission that you ought reasonably to have them in contemplation when directing your mind to the act or omission called in question. Which simply put means that if I pollute a bit of atmosphere here, and that bit of atmosphere ends up in Australia and injures my our friend in Australia, then my neighbour is an Australian. So it's global law, it's intergalactic law, it exists for any group of creatures anywhere in the universe, it's international law, it is the law. Now there are 3 ways to injure your neighbour in the law. You can do it accidentally, knowingly, or intentionally. This is not counting insanity. Accidentally is not criminal. It's called negligence. It's where you pay compensation in a civil court. You're still responsible for your actions, even if you took all reasonable steps to make sure you weren't going to injure your neighbour, and yet you still did by some reason. Then that would be negligence. So you're still responsible for your action, and you'd pay civil damages in a civil court, but you would not be arrested or imprisoned or fined. If you do exactly the same thing to injure your neighbour, and you do it knowingly, it becomes reckless and criminal, at which point you can be arrested, imprisoned, fined, and still have to pay damages. And if you injure your neighbour knowingly, if you injure your neighbour intentionally, that is seriously criminal. Now this is the difference in the extreme case, and the only difference between accidental killing, manslaughter and murder. Accidental killing is there's no prison sentence. Manslaughter is killing someone knowingly, carries a roughly 5-year prison sentence, and intentionally killing somebody is murder, it carries a life imprisonment. The same person's dead, the same person did it in exactly the same way. The only difference is whether they did it accidentally, knowingly or intentionally. If you damage the environment your neighbour's living in, you're injuring your neighbour. So any unnecessary or unreasonable environmental damage or destruction done knowingly is reckless and criminal. There's an offence on the statute books. It's called aggravated criminal damage, which is damage or destroy any property with intent to endanger life or knowing life would be endangered. Any property. If I damage my own ladder and send somebody up my ladder intending to endanger their life, that would be attempted murder, and it would carry a maximum life imprisonment. If I did it knowingly, it would be 5 years, and if I did it by accident, it would be no prison sentence. Another example, if I'm driving my car down the road and I've got no mechanical knowledge, I've had the car serviced and maintained by qualified personnel, I've got the service history, it's MOT, it's taxed, it's insured, I've done everything I reasonably can to make sure the vehicle's in good condition. I'm driving down the road, I'm stopped by the police in a routine road check, and they find out I've got defective brakes. I've done everything I reasonably can to make sure I haven't got defective brakes, and yet I'm still driving with defective brakes, which is an act which is likely to injure my neighbour. That would be negligence. If I injured somebody, I would have to pay compensation in a civil court. That's why I have to have insurance, because I wouldn't be able to pay the damages, being a poor person as I am. If I'm driving the same car down the same road at the same speed and I'm stopped by the same police officer, and this time the police officer finds, or the court finds, that I was driving with defective brakes knowingly, that would be a reckless act where I'd be arrested, imprisoned, fined and have to pay damages. And if I was driving the same car down the same road at the same speed, stopped by the same police officer, and say the court found that I was aiming at somebody, that might be attempted murder, carry a maximum life imprisonment. So you can see the difference between accidentally, knowingly or intentionally injuring somebody. And in the British Court of Law, for any person to be convicted of a crime, there have to be two things present. There has to be the actus reus, the act or the omission which occurred, and secondly there has to be the mens rea, which is the mental state of the accused person, has to be of a criminal nature. They have to be either knowingly or intentionally injuring their neighbour. Now, in contract law, any contract to commit a crime is an unenforceable contract. You obviously cannot have a legal contract to commit a crime. It's an unlawful contract. So any contract to damage or destroy the environment, unnecessarily or unreasonably, being a contract to commit a serious crime of aggravated criminal damage to the earth, is a void contract. Aggravated criminal damage to the earth is being damaged and destroyed. It's being done knowingly by the workforce, and the workforce knows this. And it is generally agreed nowadays that the threat of environmental damage and destruction is a serious or of a similar magnitude to the threat of a world war. It's a very serious threat indeed. So the workforce are going to work knowingly damaging and destroying the planet in which they live, in which their family live, and in which their neighbour lives. And if they do not carry on doing this job, they cannot pay their mortgage. There is no employment available which will pay the mortgage which doesn't damage the environment. If we can assume that the workforce is not stupid, now we're looking at builders, farmers, engineers, miners, fishermen, drivers, lumberjacks. All of these people would have served an apprenticeship, because you cannot learn any of those trades in a college or in a book, or you cannot be told. You have to do it with hands-on experience, and that is the purpose of an apprenticeship. And one of the main objectives of an apprenticeship system is to find out who's got common sense and who hasn't. You cannot have people without common sense driving big lorries down the road, or working in engineering shops, or on building sites, or on a ship at sea. So assuming the builders, the farmers, the engineers, the miners, the fishermen, the drivers, the lumberjacks, etc. have served an apprenticeship and have common sense, we ask them a simple question. Would you rather benefit the planet you live on or destroy it, given the free choice? The free choice is the information upon which to make the choice, the time in which to consider that information, and the same wages. Would you rather benefit the planet you live on or destroy it? It's a no-brainer. Obviously, anyone with common sense would rather benefit the planet than destroy it. Present circumstance, if you don't carry on going to work, destroying the planet, you cannot pay your mortgage and your family's thrown out on the street. In other words, the mortgage contract is unduly influencing and coercing millions of people to commit serious crime, the crime of aggravated criminal damage to the environment. Any contract unduly influencing or coercing a person to commit a crime is a void contract and is unenforceable in law. It says so quite plainly in contract law. Obviously, you cannot have a lawful contract forcing a person to commit crime. So the mortgage contract is an unenforceable contract. All these houses are being repossessed. It's an unenforceable contract. If people knew this information, you can say, no, you're not having the house. It's an unenforceable contract. And furthermore, that unenforceable contract is based upon virtual money, which has been created out of nothing through the fraud of fractional reserve banking. It's virtual money created out of fraud. This money consists of nothing more real than millivolts of electricity in a computer. It's virtual money. It's of no real consequence whatsoever.